I don't like to start late. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth. I'm a hearing officer appointed by the Oil Conservation Commission to conduct a hearing on proposed amendments to the Commission's rules to address PFAS in oil and gas extraction. It's docketed by the hearing clerk as 23580. We're going to begin this morning with our, what would this be, 7th or 8th opportunity for non-technical public comment as part of this hearing. And for this session, we do have an interpreter. Her name is Ashley Ortiz, to provide interpretation between English and Spanish. Ms. Ortiz, would you let the folks know that you are available?
Yes. Buenos días, estamos aquí. Yo soy una oficial de audiencias, Felicia, y estamos aquí en materia de propuesta de modificación de las normas de la Comisión para abordar la divulgación de sustancias químicas y el uso de sustancias perluoalquiladas y polifluoroalquiladas y en la extracción de petróleo y gas, de acuerdo con en las leyes correspondientes de petróleo y aceite de Nuevo México. Y estamos aquí para comentario público, no técnico. En esta sesión tenemos a la intérprete, quien soy yo, Ashley Ortiz, para proporcionar interpretación. Por favor, infórmenos si usted necesita intérprete.
Thank you. So the folks I have who signed up to offer comment and who may or may not be present on the platform, please raise your virtual hand or turn on your screen if you would prefer to let us know that you would like to offer comment during this session. Let's see, we have first William Athis. Thank you. Mr. Athis, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself? Mr. Athis. Nope. All right. Would you go to the next one then, Sheila? This is Carlos Matutes?
Matutes. Thank you.
Matutes. Would you spell your name, please?
Yes, Carlos. Last name is Matutes. I am the New Mexico community advocate for Green Latinos.
All right. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I will start your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. At Green Latinos, we are a national organization working for environmental justice for Latina populations and other communities of color. For us, throughout the country, polyfluoroalkyl substances, especially surfactants in fracking fluids, are a major concern. Here in New Mexico, we have an additional concern because of our governor's desire to create produced water under her strategic water supply plan. As I'm sure that you have heard throughout this entire week, a minuscule amount of PFAS in any kind of drinking water basically makes it unusable. Here in New Mexico, water is obviously a major concern. We're in a 25-year drought. We're a desert state. We have very few options for surface water. We rely very heavily on groundwater. If we're using PFAS in our fracking fluids, and again, as I'm sure you've heard many times throughout the week, these are considered trade secrets. The only states, to my knowledge, that no longer have those trade secret protections for fracking fluids are our neighbors to the north, Colorado and New York. We would encourage a ban on the use of PFAS in any industrial use, specifically in oil and gas. There's far too much risk for ingress into groundwater supplies through leaks in well casings, through basic spills, which happen every single day, especially in the Permian Basin. In addition to the risks to our groundwater, we are very concerned about the risks to the health and well-being of New Mexicans who are working in those oil fields. These are, in many cases, some of our most vulnerable citizens. So please, please ban the use of PFAS in oil and gas exploration in fracking fluids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Matuzas. Next we have, let's see, Dr. Emma Minks. Can you unmute yourself? I'm not hearing anything. Dr. Minks? Oh. Okay. Let's move on. We will come back around to everybody. Let's see, two, I think, yeah, Shelley Manlab.
Yes,
Are you?
good morning.
Oh, good morning. Would you spell your name for the transcript, please?
Sure, and it does look like now the person that you called before me is available, but my name is Shelley Manlev. My name is spelled Shelley Mann-Lev.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much. Thank
Do
you
you
so
swear
much.
or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm here today. I am a public health leader in New Mexico. I'm currently the executive director of Healthy Climate New Mexico, an organization of New Mexico healthcare and public health professionals and students who are mobilized to advocate for climate solutions that protect health and promote equity. And this is both a health equity and a public health issue that you are seriously considering. PFAS, these very toxic chemicals. And of course, we don't know exactly which, how, and what, because that transparency is not available to us in the fracking industry. PFAS are, as we know, to be extremely toxic in tiny amounts. And I have, as a public health expert, practicing for the last 30 years, 3 decades in New Mexico, great concerns about water. Water in New Mexico, especially now in this time of accelerating heat and climate change, we know is an accelerating, increasingly scarce resource. And we need to do everything we can in our power to make sure that we have clean, healthy water that will protect the health of the people who drink it. So many people have provided specific information about the toxic impacts. I'm just here to emphasize that as we see, those of us who not only want to protect the people here today, but for future generations, and PFAS do not expire quickly, they stay in water, in ground, that we need to do everything we can, including this ban, to make sure that our communities, workers, all of us are protected. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Let's see, this is Rebecca Sobel. Ms. Sobel, can you unmute yourself? I can't hear you. Nope. Okay. Oh, all right. We will come back to you. This is Kathleen Burke. Ms. Burke, can you unmute yourself?
Good morning.
There you are. All right. Terrific. Would you spell your last name for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am. It is Burke, B-U-R-K-E.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
My name is Kathleen Burke, resident of Sandia Park, speaking on behalf of my household. I begin by sharing with you the definition of ecocide as defined by the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide, June 2021. Ecocide has to do with people who are complicit in the destruction of nature. Ecocide is unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Just like with homicide, genocide, and femicide, as with ecocide, destruction is the key element. There are legal consequences for those who commit these acts. In the beliefs of many, there are karmic consequences. The class of PFAS chemicals are a weapon which already we know is leading us and the environment around us toward destruction. The Stop Ecocide International Foundation provides further legal definition for each of the terms used in the definition of ecocide. A, wanton means with reckless disregard for damage, which would be clearly excessive in relation to the social and economic benefits anticipated. Severe means damage which involves very serious adverse changes, disruption, or harm to any element of the environment, including grave impacts on human life or natural, cultural, or economic resources. C, widespread means damage which extends beyond a limited geographic area, crosses state boundaries, or is suffered by an entire ecosystem or species, or a large number of human beings. D, long-term means damage which is irreversible or which cannot be redressed through natural recovery within a reasonable period of time. Ecocide refers only to the very worst harms, usually on a major industrial scale, such as fracking. Distribution of PFAS chemicals in oil industry operations is a clear example of an industrial sector where unlawful or reckless conduct will cause this level of harm, which, if left unchecked, can and will rise to the level of ecocide. Ecocide further describes what is happening to our planet, the mass damage and destruction of the natural living world. It literally means killing one's home. The European Union recently voted to include ecocide-level crimes in the European Union's revised crime directive. The historic decision will strongly reinforce existing environmental laws establishing a clear, moral, as well as legal red line, aimed at preventing and punishing the gravest environmental harms. These are laws which our New Mexico lawmakers will also soon be considering. In light of the fact that we are now in the 7th mass extinction of our planet, the Holocene-Anthropocene extinction event, you might agree that laws preventing ecocide cannot be adopted soon enough in the United States, and we must pay heed to the crimes of ecocide happening in New Mexico preemptively. To commit homicide is to destroy another. Suicide is to destroy oneself. These are grave terms for the description of grave moral and legal choices, such as the grave choice you, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, are facing regarding the potential for the ecocide currently under consideration at this Commission, and
Ms.
which
Burke,
I, among
please wrap
many,
up.
hope you will wisely avert. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I think I saw Ms. Sobel come back to us. Let's see here. No, that was her. Yeah, up there in the upper right there. All right. Let's see. Ms. Sobel, are you unable to unmute yourself now? I can't hear anything. I'm sorry. All right. So for anyone having trouble with, oh yeah, you can go back to Dr. Minks. Yeah, that's a good one. For anyone having trouble unmuting themselves, uh, uh, please keep working on it if you'd like. Another possibility is to submit your comments in writing until 5 p.m. today. And there will be one more public comment period at 4:30 this afternoon. Dr. Minks, are you unable to unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. If you
Yes.
would please spell your last name.
Sure, it's M like Mary, I like indigo, N like Nancy, C like cat, K like kangaroo, and S like Sam.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I am a childhood cancer survivor, so that is part of why I have a concern with the forever chemicals. Also, just the name forever chemicals indicates that they will be around forever. And they are still understudied, although there are over 5,000 studies that I was able to find from a quick Google search that talk about the research done on PFAS. So they have been researched. I find it very concerning that the oil and gas industry is not required to share what types of PFAS chemicals they are injecting into the water here, because it does say on the research that I've read that there are various types of harmful effects from different types of PFAS. So in the 5,000 articles plus studied, I'm looking at an article by NCBI from 2022. It says that there is sufficient evidence in the studies, in those 5,000 studies, to say that there is a decreased antibody response in adults and children, decreased infant and fetal growth, an increased risk of kidney cancer, and there is suggestive evidence to say there is an increased risk of breast cancer, liver enzyme alterations, increased risk of testicular cancer, increased risk of thyroid cancer, and thyroid disease and dysfunction. So, as someone who has experienced having cancer and had it when I was, not intentionally exposing myself to any harmful chemicals, no smoking, no drinking, no like philandering in a oil field, or, just whatever could be said to argue that it would be an individual's fault of having a disease, which I don't think it usually is or ever is. It is a public health issue, and it's something that you have the responsibility to protect the public from. And additionally, as has already been said, we do have a water shortage in New Mexico. So we also have an existing issue with contamination. There was a recent study done, I'm sure you've all seen that, on huge levels of radiation and like nuclear contamination near Santa Fe. And I feel like at the bare minimum, these companies should be required to disclose their chemicals, and the fact that they are not only not required to, but have no oversight in, what they're harming us with is really scary. And I think that, we need to protect our children and our future generations. If these things are as harmful as it says they are, which I'm assuming it is after 5,000 studies.
Would you
And then,
please wrap up?
sure. And then the other ones don't have enough information because they're not disclosed. I'm assuming that means they're bad, point blank. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Minks. Let's see. Well, we can try Ms. Sobel again. I think there are some other folks too. Ms. Sobel, I'm gonna try.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, Yes, yes, yes. Would you spell your last name, please?
Sobel.
And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'm going to start your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you to all of the New Mexicans that are here today. My name is Rebecca Sobel. I am the organizing director of Wild Earth Guardians, and I want to acknowledge the hundreds and thousands of community members who have taken time out of their lives to raise their voices in defense of our water. In my 20 years of organizing in New Mexico, I've seen one issue that cuts across every line, every community in our state, and that's protecting our water. As you know, New Mexico has the least groundwater of any state in the nation, yet we rely on it for nearly most of our public water supply. Water here isn't just a resource, it's life itself. Driving up the I-25 corridor, we see how the land tells us where water touches the landscape. We are the 5th largest state by land, but we are home to the largest oil field in the nation. Not even the nation, the world, with explosive production in the Permian Basin. And yet, despite our enormous contribution to the oil and gas industry, New Mexico remains the poorest state in the United States. If oil and gas were going to make us rich, we would be rich by now. What this industry has brought us instead is a crisis of contamination. Daily, oil and gas companies spill toxic wastewater and chemicals on our lands and into our waters. This rulemaking gives us the opportunity to stand on the right side of history, prioritizing the health of New Mexicans over the profits of the richest industry on the planet. PFAS chemicals exist because of fossil fuel production. These are human-made chemicals designed to persist, to contaminate, to spread, and to remain long after the companies responsible for them have packed up and moved on. The oil and gas industry wants to be exempt from accountability, even as they inject PFAS and other toxic substances directly into the ground and ultimately into our aquifers. Instead of debating the makeup of countless PFAS compounds, the solution here is clear. No PFAS in our water. No trade secrets, no loopholes. If companies know what chemicals they're injecting, then we should too. And if they can't operate without PFAS, then maybe it's time to reconsider whether they should be operating at all. As New Mexicans, we have a sacred duty to protect our water, our land, and our people. We are at a crossroads where our decisions now will determine the health of our communities for generations. I'll close with the words of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, who herself has lobbied the EPA for PFAS protections. By taking an urgent and science-based approach to this issue, we're helping to protect communities in New Mexico and around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sobel. Here we have Nika Beauchamp. Nika Beauchamp?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, would you please spell your first and last name?
Sure, it's Nika, Nika, and Beauchamp is Beauchamp.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'm going to start your 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. So I just want to share as a mom why I am fully in support of this proposal to ban PFAS and other undisclosed chemicals in oil and gas drilling. So I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I moved to New Mexico a couple of years ago. And I just want to point out that New Mexico has done a tremendous amount for families with young children in recent years with childcare subsidies and raises for teachers working in early childhood education. That I was so excited about as a new family moving here. And then to learn that that we are allowing undisclosed chemicals, including PFAS, to be injected into the ground and into our groundwater, which, as so many people here have already very articulately shared, poses a tremendous threat to young children. I'm pretty dismayed. And I'm hoping that
Okay, there we go.
we all
There we
take
go. I
this
think I'm good.
opportunity to stand
Yeah.
up for young kids and be consistent, with our other policies and show that we really believe in protecting the next generation. And I think the key word is protection. So I know that New Mexico also recently got some funding from the FDA to do some remediation, find sources of PFAS. But what is the use of that if we're still allowing PFAS to be purposefully injected into the ground? Prevention is the most powerful form of protection. And I also want to share a story about Maine, where I moved from. I worked for an organization that worked with farmers who are grappling with horrific PFAS contamination of their land and their soil and their groundwater. And it's a result of another industry, the paper industry, lobbying to include its waste in industrial sewage sludge and allowing that to be spread on farmland. And while it's a different industry, I think the impact is the same. I worked with a farmer named Adam Nordell who ran an organic farm with his wife and his young son and discovered PFAS first in his drinking water that was 400 times the level of the safety limit, and then PFAS in his soil. And when he had his blood tested, he discovered just shockingly high levels. I think the average level for everyday Americans, because this chemical is so ubiquitous, is somewhere between 1.4 and 4.3 parts per billion. And Adam Nordell had 3,547 parts per billion of PFAS in his blood. And what breaks my heart the most about that story, besides the obvious, is that he has a 3-year-old son, or he was 3 years old when they discovered the contamination. And Adam and his wife decided not to test their son's blood levels. And I'm sorry, this always makes me tear up. I also have a 3-year-old son. And for a child that young to suffer such a high level of exposure, you can only imagine the risk to his health, to the risk of cancer, reproductive harm, neurodevelopmental damage. And that is what we are risking for our children today. And I really hope that we take this risk as seriously as it demands. And I strongly urge you to ban these chemicals in oil and gas drilling. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bishop. Would you go to Dr. Athos? Let's see. Yes, he was our original number one. Let's see, Dr. Athos, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you very much. Would you spell your last name, please?
Yes, it's Athas.
And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
I will start your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm a retired UNM professor of public health and a doctoral level epidemiologist. I've conducted human health risk assessments and have been a longtime teacher of environmental health at the graduate and undergraduate level. And I fully support the Wildlife Guardian's proposed amendments before the OCD. I think we can all agree that government and not private industry is responsible for managing the chemical hazards and risks present in our environment. As scientific knowledge advances and risk is shown to greatly outweigh benefit, then government must act to address such imbalance. In April of this year, the US EPA issued drinking water standards for 6 PFAS compounds, all of which are much more stringent than for any other regulated chemical, save dioxins. These PFAS standards are based on human health risk assessment and the best available science. There is no benefit here that outweighs the demonstrable risk from not banning these highly persistent and toxic PFAS compounds. Consider the following. Last week, a majority of the American public voted to embrace the agenda of Make America Great Again. OCD has the opportunity to engage that agenda here and now. In a competitive global economy, we need every American child and every American worker to be as smart, healthy, and fit as possible. This will not happen without proactive government action. We cannot and should not, we cannot and should not roll dice on our children's health. New Mexico is now considering widespread environmental release of huge quantities of treated produced water, a new chemical hazard source. Given that just traces of PFAS appear capable of damaging cognitive development, what societal benefits are achieved by not taking action to ensure PFAS is not present in this waste disposal stream? How does inaction lead to making America great again? Another agenda embraced in the recent election is drill, baby, drill. The sizable federal lease lands in New Mexico will no doubt lead to an increased push for environmental release of oil and gas wastewater. It is inconceivable to me as an environmental health practitioner that the state would blindly permit such releases in the absence of full disclosure. If, as OCD apparently holds, innovation requires non-disclosure of trade secrets, then we truly are rolling dice on our children's health. I'm sure smart lawyers can wrangle a solution forward from a past that never envisioned intentional release of produced water. Following the status quo benefits a few and is not a recipe for making America great again. I urge the Commission and the division to be proactive. To quote Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the likely next Secretary of Health and Human Services, quote, high quality and transparent data, clearly documented, timely rendered, and publicly available are the sine qua non of competent public health management. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Athas. Oh, no, we already did Emma Minks. So we have Laura W. Ms. W., can you hear me? This will be the last comment I take on the platform for right now, and I have commenters in the room. Laura W. No? All right. I'm going to turn to commenters in the room. I will return to the platform in just a few minutes. So,
Hello. I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. This
okay.
is Laura Wachampino.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Wachampino. If you would just spell your last name, please.
Yes. WATCHEMPINO.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you for this time to speak. I am a resident of the Pueblo of Acoma and former water quality specialist for Acoma. We know that the oil and gas industry exploration and production waste is exempt from regulation under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. That creates innumerable exposure pathways for hazardous PFAS waste to be widely dispersed in our environment, where they can cause various types of cancer and birth defects, as we heard earlier. In the event that produced water is recycled back into our environment, how can these harmful chemicals be treated without their full disclosure? The New Mexico Oil and Gas Association is putting our public health at risk with such a proposal. It is therefore incumbent on the Oil Conservation Commission and the Environment Department to close this regulatory gap, because water produced with PFAS-laced fracking fluids will be widely dispersed during the reuse of produced water, as well as during disposal, threatening our public health, our environment, and endangering New Mexico's scarce freshwater resources. The Commission, first and foremost, should ban the use of PFAS and other undisclosed chemicals used in oil and gas drilling operations. A total ban will eliminate the burdensome disclosure requirements like those adopted in Colorado and will be most protective of our health and environment. We certainly can't afford to sacrifice our health or precious water resources, as the industry is proposing. Simply permitting non-disclosure would give the industry a free pass to pollute our environment with toxic and hazardous materials, all without our knowledge or consent. In fact, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association has stated that it supports a science-based prohibition on the use of PFAS and supports requiring operators of oil and gas wells to certify to the Oil Conservation Commission that no public I'm sorry. That no PFAS containing fracturing fluids have been used in the fracturing of the well. Big oil and gas companies have exploited New Mexico's land and water and endangered our lives and health in many ways, from harmful methane emissions to undisclosed chemicals in its fracking fluids. It will certainly benefit the industry's bottom line to fight an outright prohibition on the use of PFAS and the disclosure of chemicals used during drilling operations, because it is already in a downward spiral due to excessive carbon emissions that affect our climate. The citizens of New Mexico clearly expect the Oil Conservation Commission to protect our health and environment. And the Environment Department has the duty to do so and should simply not rely on the industry's goodwill or voluntary compliance with regulatory measures that are designed to protect our health and natural resources. It must impose an outright ban on the introduction of harmful forever pollutants in oil and gas drilling operations, as well as the associated waste streams that will then be widely disseminated into the environment,
Please wrap
affecting our
up.
public health. Excuse me?
Please wrap up.
Therefore, I ask the Oil Conservation Commission, let's not prolong the injustice of allowing the industry to regulate itself. That is your job. And if you need more funding and staff to do your jobs, make sure the industry is paying its fair share. We don't want their liabilities passed off onto us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move from the platform to the folks who have been waiting patiently in the room. I will invite more comment from the platform if there's more to be given in just a little bit. Now, sir, thank you for your patience. You come up to that microphone, if you would, please. And if you would state and spell your first and last name.
Thank you, sir. Jose Angurmea Lorenzo Villegas. Villegas, V like in victory, Illegas.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
New Mexico Oil Conservation Commission. Buenos días de la Dios, amán y voten de Monegüe. On behalf of my indigenous communities of El Valle de la Ciénaga Land Grant Association and the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians Tribal Administrator Government Affairs, I would like to submit my 507 words to the New Mexico Oil Conservation Commission. In a recent Santa Fe, New Mexican article, the New Mexico Oil Conservation Commissioner, the designee for the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, stated that he'd like to see more New Mexico specific data presented. You're asking a big ask of the commission, he said. One is banning PFAS and the other is banning all undisclosed chemicals. I want to see real data in our state that should push us to more or less go the extreme of even banning undisclosed chemicals. Understood. Here is my PFAS. Triple AFF firefighting foam industrial chemical blood test and results for the commission to review if you wish to do so. However, please respect the HIPAA provisions at the same time. In the real world that we live in La Ciénaga Pueblo, Santa Fe County, with my family and neighbors, we do not deserve to be disrespected, dismissed, and ignored by the DOD, the New Mexico Environment Department, the governor, the EPA, and the municipalities that were supposed to protect us from an environmental justice violation in the first place. My family, who resides in the La Ciénaga Pueblo over 48 years and generations, did not authorize and or give permission to the government entities mentioned to place us in irreparable harm and in danger with this industrial chemicals that have contaminated our private wells, specifically endangering our health, welfare, and public safety. Frankly, out of the 6 PFAS, PFOA, PFOS, PFNN, et cetera, industrial chemicals that were identified by the EPA to be hazardous substance materials, 3 were identified in my blood system. And yes, I'm a healthy veteran Marine, and I am pissed. In conclusion, so how much analytical real data from New Mexico does this commission really need to make a public policy decision to protect our indigenous communities from throughout New Mexico from irreparable harm from the undisclosed chemicals that the corporate oil and gas industry has identified as a trade secret and attempting to hide it from us? Instead of catering to the corporate oil gas industry to increase their profit margins, this commission should mandate to require the allocation funding sources to pay for conducting an environmental community health assessment, a PFAS blood study in my indigenous community, where my family and neighbors have gotten medically sick and dying from these dangerous hazardous chemicals in Santa Fe and throughout the state of New Mexico. Ya basta. That's enough. Así es. It's done. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viejas. Is there anyone else in the room, sir? If you would state and spell your first and last name,
Colin Cox, Colincox.
and do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Colin Cox with the Center for Biological Diversity. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. I'd like to start by just highlighting how nasty PFAS are. And I know you've heard a lot about this already this week, but there are thousands of different PFAS compounds, and we don't really know a lot about most of them. But we do know what we do know is bad. PFAS cause reproductive harm. They cause developmental delays in children. They cause cancer. They damage the immune system, the liver, the thyroid, and the cardiovascular system, among other problems they cause. They're called forever chemicals because they persist in the environment much, much longer than most of the other pollution that humans make. They're a danger to all life. We all have them in our bodies. And most of us got them from contaminated water and food. And that's why protecting our water is so important, and why the Center for Biological Diversity opposes the use of PFAS in oil and gas production and supports Wild Earth Guardian's petition to ban them. Oil and gas companies must stop pumping these chemicals into the ground and spilling them on our land. This week, we've heard representatives of the oil industry insist that PFAS aren't used in oil and gas production, which begs the question of why they'd fight so hard to continue doing something that they claim they aren't doing. But we know PFAS are being used in oil and gas production, and we know that they can be present in fracking waste, also called produced water, which oil and gas companies spill every day in New Mexico, multiple times per day. So we really have to stop this industry from poisoning us and.
Sorry. Nope. Hold on, sir. There you go.
Am I back? Great. Sorry about that. The center also supports Wild Earth Guardian's proposal to require the disclosure of chemicals used in oil and gas production. We have a right to know what companies are pumping into our ground and spilling on our soil. But right now, the industry is hiding a lot of that information from us and asking us to trust them. An industry with a century-long history of spoiling the environment and misleading the public about it. Contrary to what the industry is arguing, disclosure would require the company to either voluntarily disclose the chemicals they're using or not use them in New Mexico. And this is about disclosing individual chemicals, not formulas, not recipes, not proportions, and so not trade secrets protected by law. The Uniform Trade Secrets Act is not an obstacle here. And OCD could not misappropriate the identity of a chemical because it would be voluntarily disclosed by the operator. Operators would have a simple choice: either tell us what chemicals they're using or don't use them here. We should follow the lead of other states like Colorado, which ban PFAS in oil and gas production and require companies to disclose all the chemicals they're using in their operations. Other states are doing this, and we must do it here. The bottom line is that PFAS threaten our waters, our environment, our wildlife, and our health. We ask the Commission to ban their use in oil and gas production and require operators to disclose the chemicals they're using in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. So, sir. And just as a reminder to everyone, we do have an interpreter between English and Spanish and English this morning. If you would please state and spell your first and last name.
Sure. State Senator Harold Pope Jr. Last name is Pope-Jr.
Thank you very much. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead. I'll start your 3 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm State Senator Harold Pope Jr., Senator representing Northwest Albuquerque, and I just want to provide public comment. I support the ban on PFAS, defined as a substance with at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom. Apparently, this has been a controversial topic in this proceeding because some want to narrow the PFAS definition to only include well-characterized PFAS compounds. I urge you not to be narrow, but rather inclusive or expansive, because the lives of New Mexicans are at stake, and here's why. Number one, the precautionary principle, which is a worldwide social, medical, and legal approach that encourages caution when there is scientific uncertainty about all the known potential risks, and in this case, may have severe human and environmental repercussions. The particular import for decision makers like you and like me applies here, because there's a very real possibility that even though every harm is not conclusively known, we have a responsibility to protect the public from exposure to contamination, especially when emerging scientific research is finding that there is a plausible risk, a very serious risk, to future generations. Number two, 23 states and Congress have relied on a more inclusive definition. Sufficient data exists to characterize the deleterious effects of human health from PFAS. Over the past decade, 33 states have or are currently considering regulation and legislation addressing toxic PFAS chemicals, a class of chemicals dubbed forever chemicals because of their inability to break down in nature. Number three, 4 parts per trillion. While I understand you're rightfully concerned that we don't have toxicology data on all 10 to 15,000 PFAS compounds, and that gives you pause to enact an all-out PFAS ban, which is understandable, I ask you to consider that the EPA did enact water standards for several PFAS chemicals as low as 4 parts per trillion. Based on this standard for just 6 chemicals, many states have jumped into regulatory and legislative action. I urge you to act now as well. Having singly, widely adopted definition of a ban on PFAS, defined as with at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom, creates important consistency for manufacturers, retailers, the oil and gas industry, and regulators. The definition proposed by the petitioner has been used in state and federal legislation since 2018. Lastly, on this point, there may be many variants of the COVID virus that haven't been fully analyzed, tested, and their DNA mapped. Does that mean that we should just assume they're not dangerous simply because the analysis of the other variants is not complete? Some of the variants may in fact be harmless, but does that mean that we should just assume that they are harmless in the light of the fact that millions of people have died from some of these variants and we just don't know? I turn now to a related topic. NMOGA put out a call on an email yesterday on the proposed amendments to the Oil and Conservation Division rules. On one hand, NMOGA said they are not intentionally using hydraulic fracking operations and that these chemicals are not commonly used in oil and gas operations. Yet, they still urge supporters to speak out against the proposed regulations. I received this email in my inbox. And for me, if they're not intentionally using PFAS and these chemicals are not being commonly used in oil and gas operations, then why are they opposed to these amendments? It was also stated in the email that they follow all the regulations for disclosure of fracking fluid, and it's done through Frac Focus. But from my understanding, and we all know, in Colorado, they've enacted a PFAS ban and require full chemical disclosure of oil and gas from oil and gas operations. What this means is the cat is out of the bag. In Colorado, the chemical constituents are already revealed. These chemicals and their fracking fluid can't be trade secrets because they're no longer secrets. They're now showing that the industry, what the industry's been doing, and that the industry has not been harmed. And so it also shows that they won't be harmed here in New Mexico as well. Apparently, no one has been harmed, and we haven't seen that. If they'd certainly provide evidence of what harm that has been done, I think we should all see that. Furthermore, this commission or any public official in New Mexico, or for that matter, any member of the public who's concerned with whether these fracking fluids contain chemicals that are dangerous to the health right now, we would have to travel to Denver to get that information. And I just don't think that's something that we should have to do. We should be able to do that here. It's important that, as I understand it, none of these companies has put evidence in the record that disclosing chemical formulas has harmed them in Colorado or California or any other states, or that likely harm would happen if they disclosed it. This whole issue seems really ridiculous to me. And in light of the fact that ONG operators have already disclosed their chemical constituents in other states. In closing, we have a moral, ethical, and legal duty to protect our fellow New Mexicans from likely harm. That includes full chemical disclosure of hydraulic fracking fluids. As a member of the New Mexico legislature, I urge you to implement the broad authority to regulate oil and gas that we gave you and that protects public health, the environment, and property. Thank you for allowing me to provide this public comment, and thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Senator Pope. Let me return to was there anyone else in the room? I didn't see anyone else in the room. Okay, so let me return to the platform. Is there anyone else on the platform who would like to take this opportunity and who has not already offered comment? Take this opportunity. There will be one more public comment session at 4:30 this afternoon. Please turn on your screen or raise your virtual hand. Let's see here. Sheila, do you want to see if that Rita, let's see here. Rita Norwood, did you want to make a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm just here to listen to everyone else. I was actually invited into this meeting from one of my friends who works for environmental protection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So I don't see any other virtual hands or screens on. So we are going to return to the technical case. And near the end of yesterday, we had finished the divisions case as I understand it. But let me make sure. Mr. Tremaine?
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner, Commissioners, and the public and parties. Thank you. OCD has no further witnesses.
Great, thank you very much. Let me ask if there are any other matters we need to discuss before I turn to other parties.
Madam Hearing Examiner?
Yes.
One of our speakers during public comment, Mr. Lorenzo Villegas, handed me his written note, which differed a little bit from his spoken statement. Can we enter this into the record?
Yes, absolutely. That would go to Ms. Apodaca and would become part of the record.
I'll make sure she gets this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All righty. So, Mr. Davis.
Good morning. Before I forget, I wanted to move a few exhibits into evidence that Guardians has not moved. That would be Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 4. That's the Colorado PFAS ban and disclosure law. Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 5, that's the California disclosure law. Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 7, that is the New Mexico Tech publication about climate change effect on our freshwater resources in New Mexico over the next 50 years. And Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 8, which is the exhibit that compiles the 23 state definitions for PFAS that are consistent with Guardian's definition. And while I understand that I can cite these are, state laws and publicly available publications from a state entity, I do want to move them into evidence so that they are part of the record and that the commission has access to them without having to get on Westlaw and find them.
Sure, I understand. Are there any objections to the admission of Guardian's Exhibit 4, 5, 7, or 8? No, I don't hear anything. Thank you. 4, 5, 7, and 8 are admitted. Any other preliminary matters? No? All right. So as I understand it, EOG, and thank you very much, Ms. Ortiz. Our public comment session is ended. Thank you. As I understand it, EOG is not going to present witnesses or make an opening statement. So let me turn to Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Maxwell?
Good morning.
Good morning. Would you like to make an opening statement or another, a sworn statement? What would you like to do?
Your Honor, I'll make an opening statement.
Terrific. Go ahead.
We are here today to consider a petition proposing rule changes aimed at banning the use of PFAS in downhole operations and requiring the disclosure of all chemicals used in oil and gas production, purportedly to protect public health. While the intention behind this petition is understandable, I must express significant concerns about adopting these rules based on the evidence or lack thereof presented. Throughout this hearing, we've heard a series of ifs. If PFAS contamination is occurring due to downhole operations, if this contamination reaches groundwater, if it poses a health risk unique to the oil and gas industry. However, these are speculative scenarios without concrete evidence to substantiate them. The allegations rely heavily on theoretical risks rather than demonstrable facts. It's important to recognize that PFAS compounds are ubiquitous in modern society. They are present in a wide array of consumer products and industrial applications, making them essentially a new boogeyman. Singling out the oil and gas industry ignores other significant sources of PFAS exposure. For instance, the use of firefighting foam, particularly in combating grass fires across the expansive grasslands and ranch areas of Lee County and Eddy County, likely contributes to PFAS presence in the same environments that are shared by oil and gas operators. These regions regularly experience large grass fires where brush trucks deploy firefighting foams to protect people, property, and the environment. Telling that the current focus is particularly pinned on the oil and gas industry, when there are clearly other routes through which environmental health may be impacted. Implementing regulations based on speculative evidence not only risks creating unenforceable rules, but also may extend beyond the fiscal and operational capacity of the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. Changes proposed by Wild Earth Guardians would require legislative action rather than regulatory adjustments, placing them outside the authority of this agency. Adopting such rules without solid evidence and proper legislative backing could undermine the regulatory framework for public trust. Therefore, I find petitioner's proposed rule changes should not be adopted in its original or revised forms. A more comprehensive, evidence-based approach is necessary. This concludes my opening statement. I will not be presenting any rebuttal witnesses or evidence, and I return the proceedings to the hearing officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maxwell. Let's see, I wanted to do one thing before I went to Namoga. I meant to do it a little earlier. Sheila, would you come up to the witness stand, please? Would you state your name for the record? I've been referring to you for 4 days, but
Yes, my name's Sheila Apodaca.
do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Do you have in your hand the same document I have here, which is a notice of compliance?
Yeah.
Would you explain what that is, please?
Sure. This is a certificate of compliance that I filed into the case file in this matter, showing the matters that I took to comply with the State Rules Act on giving notice to the public of the meeting.
Thank you. I would like to make this a single-page document, Hearing Officer Exhibit 1, so that we have in the record a clear basis for a statement in any statement of reasons, for example, that the commission would adopt that all notice requirements were met. Are there any objections to that? Would you like to see it, Mr. Davis? Okay. Or you could even take Sheila's copy or this copy. It's all the same, but it sets out all the various ways in which,
Madam Hearing Officer,
yes, Ms. Nanasi.
is it possible for Ms. Apodaca to make that part of the record?
Right. I'm making, for the same reason Mr. Davis made certain parts of the record exhibits so that they are prominent and easily findable. That's what I'm doing.
Thank you.
Guardians has no objection.
All right. Anyone else?
No.
Nope. All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Apodaca. Does anyone have a question of Ms. Apodaca? No. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Now we turn to Namoga. Ms. Mulcahy.
Good morning. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning to all the parties and folks in the audience. I'm going to call Namoga's first witness, Dr. Janet Anderson.
Good morning. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Ms. Mulcahy.
Thank you. May I be able to share my screen, please?
Sheila, if you would allow that, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Anderson.
Good morning.
Could you please spell your name for the record?
Last name is Anderson, Anderson. First name Janet, Janet.
Dr. Anderson, did you provide direct written testimony marked as Exhibit E and attached Exhibits E1 through E29 for this hearing?
Yes, I did.
Dr. Anderson, do you have any changes or additions to your direct testimony or exhibits?
No, I do not.
Dr. Anderson, do you adopt your written testimony marked as Exhibit E as your sworn testimony today?
Yes, I do.
Is this testimony true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to go ahead and move into the record for admission Exhibits E NMOGA exhibits E through E29, and NMOGA rebuttal exhibit E30.
I believe we were sent E30
Yes, ma'am.
via email. Are there objections to E and through E30? No? All right, hearing none, they are admitted.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, could you please provide a brief summary of your testimony?
Yes, it would be an honor. Good morning, everyone. Based on my experience with PFAS, I've been working in this space for over a decade, and I'm a board certified toxicologist and human health risk assessor. I've been asked to essentially do three things. One, provide support to NMOGA on their PFAS definition. Two, ensure that statements about concerns for PFAS exposure and risk are accurate and fact-based. And then three, provide some guidance around the risk communication of disclosure of chemicals. So to that end, my colleague, Dr. Richardson, from whom you'll hear later, he and I worked together to propose a definition for PFAS. Our definition is consistent with the US EPA Toxic Substances Control Act, so that's TSCA. It's a regulatory definition adopted by EPA because it covers a very, very large, broad list of PFAS that present the most, they call it, highest concern. It also covers the PFAS that have the physical and chemical characteristics that are relevant to this rulemaking. I want to be really clear on something. I think the concern and the devastating impacts of certain PFAS, PFOA, and PFAS in the environment are not a debate here. I agree. These chemicals are, as we've heard from the wonderful testimony of the public, found in the environment. They're mobile in the environment. PFOA and PFAS are bioaccumulative, and they do have toxicities at very low concern levels, regulatory levels that we have rarely seen. However, to make statements such as all PFAS are exceptionally toxic is simply just not true. To make statements that all PFAS are mobile in the environment is not true. To make statements that PFAS are all bioaccumulative, not true. To make even the statement that all PFAS, using the definition proposed by Wild Earth Guardians, are persistent is not true. That being said, again, I want to be clear, I support the ban of PFAS in hydraulic fracturing fluid, provided that rulemaking is tangible, executable, and enforceable, and that the definition of PFAS truly will protect public health. I also support the full disclosure of chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing to OCD and in the event of loss of a well integrity. Why? I do think that it is our regulators that are trained and have the experience to best interpret that information on a site-specific level, and then have the authority to execute the site-specific actions that need to take place to investigate the release, the well integrity event, and to best protect public health. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for being here. This has been quite a week. It's really been an honor to be here and to listen to this. And I want to commend the commission for, I mean, it's a yeoman's job to try to understand a complicated chemistry, a complicated rulemaking. I really appreciate the stakeholders that are here and your interest in hearing from all sides. So with that, I will happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I'm going to go ahead and share on my screen what's been marked as exhibit NMOGA rebuttal exhibit E30. If my computer will cooperate, I will do that. Okay. Dr. Anderson, can you see what I've put up as NMOGA Rebuttal Exhibit E30?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Dr. Anderson, we have heard a lot of testimony this week that there's 3 different PFAS definitions. Some are broad, some are narrow. They're all over the map. Could you please respond to whether we are really seeing 3 different PFAS definitions?
Yeah, there's some interesting nuances, obviously, but the reality is, in practicality, as can be executed, there's not differences in these definitions materially. The 2 most closely aligned would be New Mexico OCDs and NUMOGAs. At the end of the day, again, to execute and to enforce these definitions, they're practically the same. And so I think that that's sort of reduce the pressure and the temperature on that just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And let me ask you here, on the OCD definitions, while we're looking at it, do you see where it says United States Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA standard analytical methods? Do you see that line?
Yes, I do.
And then it lists method 537.1.
Yes.
And method 533.
Yes.
And method 8327.
Yes.
And method 1633.
Correct.
Have these been standardized methods?
Yes, they are.
And what does that mean from your field when a method is standardized?
So standardized methods are the gold standard for what we use in environmental investigations and for compliance. It means that labs that are certified and follow the standard analytical method procedure can reliably produce results that can be validated, have the proper QA/QC, and that can be sort of high confidence to reliably, reproducibly use that data.
And these methods that I just listed here, 537.1, 533, 8327, 1633, are they able to analyze for a single fully fluorinated carbon atom?
They are not.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, I've now put up on the screen slide 2 here, and there was some discussion and questions about NMOGA's definition of PFAS and why that was put forward. And I believe it was Dr. Hansen who testified that that would not be protective of public health. Could you explain why NMOGA chose that definition specifically?
Sure. Dr. Richardson and I really wanted to make sure that a definition we proposed was a regulatory definition that we could point to. EPA has a ton of documentation and literature around why this is their definition under the TSCA program. And I think this quote here really summarizes that well. It focuses on the PFAS of concern because these are the PFAS that are known to be persistent and the potential presence of which in the environment may present both a human exposure and then therefore a human health risk. So what's important is the contrast, right? So for chemicals with only one fully fluorinated compound, those are not persistent. They also don't have the characteristics of stability, durability, the thermal, protectiveness, all the things that we think about when we think about PFAS are not associated with the single fluorinated. These are gases. These are pharmaceuticals. I've been told potentially agricultural chemicals. But typically when we think about in the traditional definition of PFAS, it's always these highly stable compounds that repel water and oil and grease and that are highly stable under extreme temperatures. And that requires at least 2 fully fluorinated carbons.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. You said persistent, that these compounds that NMOGA proposed, that the single fully fluorinated carbons are not persistent. When you say persistent, what do you mean by that?
Sure. So environmental persistence, so chemicals in the environment can be degraded or transformed because the microbes chew them up because of UV light, right? Or temperature, pressure. So if a chemical is persistent, they are resistant to those kinds of things. If they're able to degrade, that means the atoms in the molecule can be broken apart. And so for a chemical to just have one fully fluorinated carbon, it can break apart. It's not protected by those fluorines. And as said here, what it degrades to is just that end carbon, that trifluoroacetic acid. That's well studied here in the US under especially the AIR program, because again, gases. The hydrofluorocarbons that were introduced to replace greenhouse gases degrade to trifluoroacetic acid. The EU has an extensive dossier on TFA. So again, persistence meaning potential to degrade. And we need to make sure that we do capture those in our definition and consideration, that the terminal dead end products, that's what we call the sort of the last little bits of the chemicals that can't degrade any further. We do want to make sure we capture those, and that would be considered 2 carbons or more.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, there has also been a lot of discussion this week about fluoropolymers, non-polymers, and everything is toxic in both categories. Could you please explain what we are looking at here and why it's not necessarily true that all PFAS are extremely toxic?
Sure. This is a admittedly woefully simplified family tree for PFAS. But what it's attempting to demonstrate is that PFAS, broadly spoken, can be divided into polymers and non-polymers. And sometimes even that terminology is tricky. So non-polymers are these small, just small molecular weight, shown here, typically defined as less than 1,000 Dalton molecules. That includes the normal PFOA, PFAS, PFNA, the alphabet soup that we're talking about. Contrast that with polymers, though. So polymers are massively large compounds. So over 100,000 up to over 1 million Daltons. And basically what a polymer is you take a monomer, so a small piece, and you repeat it over and over and over and over and over, like building, Lego blocks put together. So for example, like as a size comparison, if you think of the monomer or the small little piece, equivalent to like a non-polymer small chemical, the size of a marble. And this is an analogy, so I'm not trying to be super precise here, but my organic chemist told me that it's close enough. So if a monomer is the size of a marble, the polymer would be the size of a football field. That's the difference in size. And so polymers, especially fluoropolymers like PTFE, I want to be very clear, are designed to be really stable. So they're these long, huge chains. They're considered to be not biologically available. They're so big that they don't readily absorb through a cell membrane. They're just too big. Also, there's several, because the fluoropolymers specifically have to be stable, they don't have reactive groups on them. And actually, I think, Ms. Mulcahy, could you hit the next?
Yeah, absolutely. I just have a quick question for you, Dr. Anderson, on this slide. You said that the PTFE is not biologically available. Could you explain what biologically available means?
Sure. And I want to be real careful. Again, language matters. So fluoropolymers like PTFE are so big that they can't absorb through a cell wall. So if we ingest it, the data suggests so far that it just gets excreted. Kind of like a grain of sand, right? Like it doesn't get absorbed. These non-polymer chemicals, it depends on the chemical structure, but they can get absorbed, they can bind to proteins, they can do a bunch of stuff that interacts with the cellular biology. That's the difference.
Thank you.
Did I answer that? Okay.
Yes, and you also mentioned the differences in molecular weight between these compounds.
Yeah.
Why does molecular weight matter?
Yeah, molecular weight and size and structure of compounds and the chemistry of that dictates both how it might move in the environment and, from my perspective, then how people and receptors might be exposed and how it's going to move in our bodies and what it might do. So if something is huge, it's going to behave very differently than something that's small. That's an overgeneralization, of course, because there's many other things that matter. But the molecular weight or the size of a chemical gives us an indication of a line of evidence of potential toxicity, potential exposure, potential fate and transport.
And is it a fair characterization to say that not all PFAS have the same molecular weight? That's the analogy that you did with the marbles.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So again, across this entire family, there are, exponentially large number of different molecular weights. There are certain cutoffs of molecular weights of what we understand to be biologically available can come through a cell wall. Some compounds and some PFAS are tiny, meaning they really don't even bind to proteins well. And so again, that molecular weight, it really tells us a lot. It's not the be end all, but it tells us a lot about how a chemical might behave in both the environment and in human body.
And in your field of toxicology, Dr. Anderson, why does it matter that a receptor can bind?
So
sorry.
Yeah, no, that it's a really good question. So when I talk about receptor binding, again, my background's molecular biology. This is how chemicals actually interact in our bodies. And PFAS, specifically, for example, PFO and PFAS, unfortunately, they are the sweet spot, perfect size to bind to a lot of proteins in our body. They bind to proteins in our blood, they bind to proteins in our kidneys, and that's why we hang on to them. They stay in our bodies. But PFAS that are smaller than that just don't bind as well. It's kind of like trying to catch a ping pong with a catcher's mitt, right? It's not the right size, you're going to drop it. PFAS that are too big also won't bind to that protein. So binding to proteins is one way of bioaccumulation, which means exposure to a very small amount of a chemical, but it stays in our body. We don't eliminate it very quickly. So that's one mechanism of bioaccumulation specific to PFAS. It also is a mechanism for potential toxicity. So binding to receptors and then causing those protein receptors to do things in the cell to signal different activities. And so that binding to receptors, which is contingent on the size and charge and shape of chemicals, is critical to understanding toxicity.
And so I just want to make sure that when you said those really small compounds that can bind to receptors, you were saying PFOS and PFOA.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Just because here PFAS is a thing to say.
Yeah.
It sounds different on this end of the mic.
Uh-huh. I'll spell out when I'm saying a specific chemical, I'll spell out the alphabet soup.
Thank you.
I'll try to remember.
Thank you. Okay. And again, while we're on this conversation about polymers and non-polymers, Dr. Anderson, there's been lots of conversations this week, testimony that, again, all PFAS are toxic, all PFAS are the same. Could you explain what we have here on this slide to discuss that point?
Sure. I just wanted to put some of the key PFAS in their correct family. So as mentioned, PTFE is a fluoropolymer, completely different in size. Dramatically different, right? PFOA and PFOS, they fall under the perfluoroalkyl substance family. What that means, the per means all. Little chemistry lesson there. Per means all. The F for fluoro, so all fluorines. What that means is the carbons are fully fluorinated. The O actually stands for the number of carbons, octo. And so that's how you kind of decipher this alphabet soup. That subset of chemistries, the fully fluorinated, varies based on both chain length
and what's at the end. And that's either the A for a carboxylic acid or an S for a sulfonate. And so it really only, best that I can tell, there's about 24 of those, and that's it. But those are the ones that we have studied because they were used the most as fluorosurfactants, highest volume. And those are the ones that we have information about toxicity, bioaccumulative nature. They're not all bioaccumulative, going back to the protein binding, but that's the family. All the poly, so poly means many, not all. So highly fluorinated, many fluorines, but not all. So a lot of the discussion around all the rest of the PFAS falls in that category. That's probably the biggest family of PFAS. So my boxes here are not drawn to scale, but everything else. So like the Gen X, the fluorotelomere alcohols, the fluorotelomere sulfonates, all of those fall into that polyfluoroalkyl group.
Thank you. And you said, Dr. Anderson, that there was a group that was the most studied because those were the most concerned, and you didn't say what those are. Could you just clarify for the record what those are?
Yeah, we started with the fully fluorinated, the perfluoroalkyl substances. So PFOA, PFAS, used in the highest production according to the industries, and used in the widest range of applications due to their fluorosurfactant nature and their ability to be highly stable, repel oil and grease and water and all of those things. They're also the terminal degradation products. So degradation and impurities are an important thing for talking about PFAS. And those terminal sort of, if you're going to have something break down, it's going to be at a carbon that is not fluorinated, or maybe an oxygen that's stuck in the middle of the group or something weird. It will break down to and stop breaking down at the fully fluorinated chain. I hope I'm making that make sense. So the fluorines around the carbon kind of protect those carbons. So if a carbon is not fully fluorinated, it's not protected. It can be broken apart. Or if there's a different molecule in there that's not fluorinated, like an oxygen, it's not protected. So those polyfluoroalkyl substances and even bits and pieces of the side chain fluorinated polymers can break down into the fully fluorinated substances. So they're the most well studied because at the end of the day, not only were they the most used, not only do they have similar physical chemical characteristics, including protein binding, size, shape, but they also can be the degradation, the common degradation products to so many of the other PFAS.
Were any of the class of non-polymers that you were just talking about, PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS, used in the oil and gas industry, to your knowledge?
Not that I have seen, not to my knowledge.
Could you give us a common example of what a PFOS or a PFOA might be? Would that be like firefighting foam?
Both are present in AFFF, the older formulations of AFFF. PFOS was also heavily used in things like Scotchgard, surface treatments, textile treatments, both of them. Yeah. PFOA is a common breakdown product of other fluorosurfactants as well. Because again, anything that's got 8 or more carbons could break down to PFOA.
And let me ask you, Dr. Anderson, in the definition of PFAS, PFAS that NMOGA proposed here, did that definition include PFOA?
Yes, it did.
Did that definition include PFOS?
Yes, it did.
Did it include the breakdown products of PFOA?
PFOA is the breakdown product.
Okay. And so did it then include breakdown products?
Yes, it did.
And the analytical methods that the OCD, Oil Conservation Division, included in their definition, do those analytical methods analyze for breakdown products?
The perfluoroalkyl substances, yes, these degradation products.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Anderson, since we are having the most fun with a chemistry lesson this morning, I thought, why not actually put some chemical structures up? And show everyone what we're talking about. I think that might, as a lawyer pretending to be a chemist, that might be helpful to everyone. So could you please explain, Dr. Anderson, what we're looking at here in terms of what we've heard this week from other witnesses?
Sure, and I'll promise not to try to not make this too painful. And as a toxicologist walking through chemistry, again, the chemistries, though, the chemical structures are really important to understand the toxicology, the fate and transport. So the first column shows just an example of some of those fully fluorinated substances. Anywhere where there's two lines that touch, that's a carbon. We don't write the C's just because it gets a little too busy, but there's carbons. And you can see that those carbons are in a chain and that every single carbon has the fluorine around it. That's what it means. And so you can see that you've got some with 8 going down to 7 that are fluorinated in the PFOA molecule, but technically 8 carbons. And then there's an example of just a small little one at the bottom, the B for bute or 4. The middle column, those are just some examples of some common polyfluorinated substances. So these are the ones that we have, some of them we've studied, the 6,2-FTS, for example, 6,2-fluorotelomere alcohol. Gen X is at the bottom. Gen X is drawn a little wonky, and I don't know why. All of these structures come from EPA's chemistry dashboard. But what you can see is that there are carbons, for example, at the 6,2-FTOH at the end. You'll see how there's some lines drawn that don't have fluorines attached to them. Those are the carbons that break off. So when it degrades, it just degrades to that chain that has the Fs. So that's where it breaks. And so similarly, the molecule below it, and to be fair, I don't actually know the full chemical name of this one. I can certainly look it up, but the acronym is listed there for you. It would degrade similarly. So even though we don't have toxicity information for FPE-SAA, you can see how the molecules are pretty similar with that key fully fluorinated chain. And in our bodies and in the environment, the end groups can break off. Leaving that fluorinated chain, we do have the toxicity information on that chain. So while we may not have chemical specific information, for example, on the FPE-SAA, we have some really good indications of what might be happening. And FPE-SAA is not included in the analyte list. It is included in our definition. But we could measure and monitor for the degradation product, and we can have some information about potential risk because it's the chain, that piece that binds to the receptors in our bodies that then causes the myriad of potential health effects. And so even with Gen X, you can see, even though it's drawn a little wonky, it kind of still stretch it out a little bit. It could still fit. It could still do that same pattern of fitting into a binding or of a receptor. But I will say, for example, Gen X is not bioaccumulative. We eliminate it pretty quickly, matter of days to weeks. Why is that? Well, you can look here and see it does have sort of this dangly piece. This is my chemistry coming out, right? All the chemists listening are cringing. But it's got that dangly piece, which means it doesn't fit into the receptor as well. So in our kidneys, when we try to eliminate chemicals, our kidneys think that these long chains are lipids. So fatty acids are carbons in a row, fully hydrogenated with hydrogens. So our body is like, oh, fatty acid, I need that for energy. I need that for metabolism. So it pulls it back in. It doesn't do that as well with the really small ones and with Gen X. And then it doesn't do it as well with the really big ones because they can't bind. In the box that I've shown, just the structure for FPTFE, and what we have been calling here as FPEG in quotes, so no one thinks that this is the official formal definition. We made it up. What you have to squint, but I'd like to call your attention to is the small little N outside of the brackets. That indicates that those are repeating units over and over and over and over and over. And so that's what's in that chemical structure there. But you can see PTFE fully fluorinated, highly, highly stable. Honestly, not a lot is known about the FPEG, but the group on the end has fluorines with an N, meaning repeated over and over and over and over. And then on the bottom, I just put some random different PFAS that fit the various definitions. And you can see that they have vastly different structures. So as soon as you get away from the fully fluorinated alkyl acids or the chains of carbons, you start getting all kinds of funky cyclics, you get rings, you get all sorts of crazy things. And even if we don't know the toxicity, I can look at this molecule and say it will behave differently than PFOA, for example. Fully fluorinated, I'm talking about the again, all, fluoro-T-butcyclohexane. It is fully fluorinated, suggesting it's highly stable. But it doesn't have any degradation points in it. But it also doesn't look like a chain that would bind the same receptors. So those are just some examples.
I just have a few questions on something that you said. You said one of the things you said is that the middle category there, the polyfluorinated substances, can degrade. Is that correct?
They can, yeah.
Okay, and when they degrade, what do they degrade into?
That's a whole area of research, to be honest. And so what we know for sure is that the fully fluorinated bits, the pieces, the tail ends, are going to be where they stop. Under what conditions they degrade, how quickly they degrade, and what might be what we call intermediates are still an active area of research.
Okay. And the category of perfluorinated substances on that left-hand column, do we have analytical methods for those?
The so fully fluorinated,
yes.
First column, yes.
Okay. And on the bottom right-hand corner, I see a chemical structure that says Paxlovid. Is that Paxlovid as in the COVID treatment?
It is indeed, yes.
And so am I to understand that Paxlovid uses PFAS?
Paxlovid meets the definition of a PFAS as proposed by the Wild Earth Guardians. If you look closely on the molecule on the farthest left-hand side, there's 3 fluorines all around a carbon. So that carbon is fully fluorinated. So it has 1 fully fluorinated carbon. That's very, very common in pharmaceutical. I don't exactly know why, I've asked, but adding fluorines to drugs is very, very common. And still being approved for use. Lipitor is another example. And so I just wanted to show that the rest of the molecule looks nothing like a PFAS. And in fact, this molecule breaks down. It's not persistent in our bodies. Certainly isn't considered an oil repellency or water repellency. It doesn't have the fluorosurfactant properties.
You make me want to ask if Paxlovid's ever been used in oil and gas drilling, but I won't. Strike that from the record.
Couldn't tell you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson, we're talking about all of the different areas of PFAS, fluoropolymers, non-polymers, and where there are still areas of what we know and where there are still areas of research. So could you please explain what we're seeing here to respond to some of the other testimony that we've heard this week about we don't know enough about PFAS, we have no idea, it's all still developing science?
Sure. So this is a figure that was put together by the team that worked on the ITRC. That is an acronym that stands for the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council. It's a group of we all volunteer our time and work with state regulators to put together guidance documents on key chemistries and key issues in the environmental space. I do believe this was referenced in some of Dr. Horowitz or Mr. Horowitz's testimony. This was a figure that was first created at the initial version or the first version of the guidance document for PFAS. And what it is showing is that, yes, PFOA and PFAS grabbed our attention right away, rightfully so. But we quickly moved to the very similar, like structured other fully fluorinated compounds, and that's shown in the orange and the purple. So that is a list of the fully fluorinated or perfluoroalkyl substances. And we have a lot of attention or a lot of data on those. You can see it says early attention, and this was even 5 years ago. We then moved to the green to start to understand, well, what about all these weird fluorotelomers and the perfluoroalkyl ethers? That's the Gen X. Oh no, I'm sorry, polyfluoroalkyl ethers, the Gen X, but these other subclasses of the poly. So the green is where we start to introduce the polyfluorinated substances. And then finally, at the very bottom, then the rest, right? The rest of the PFAS that don't fall in those. But it is getting increasing attention even as of 5 years ago. I do want to read the footnote under that says that, you know, this diagram isn't meant to depict, again, any kind of accurate size. Scaling is not accurate. The number of the other PFAS is not necessarily, it says not a greater quantity by mass, concentration, or frequency of detection. So even though it's a bigger slice, it was just meant to represent other chemicals, not, you know, not by mass.
So Dr. Anderson, in terms of what we understand today for PFAS, where are we looking at NMOGA Rebuttal Exhibit 30.5 in terms of color? Where are we?
I mean, we're already in the blue of what we understand today. Now, fully characterized toxicity information on a chemical by chemical basis, we're in the purple, right? Some of the green, 6,2 FTOS and FTOH, but definitely continuing to rapidly expand our information.
And all of those PFAS that have been analyzed for toxicity to date, are they all extremely toxic in low levels?
No. So we have toxicity information on, actually, just this week, EPA released their, what they call the regional screening levels. It's what we use to screen groundwater and soil. It contains 31 PFAS. So we have toxicity information, at least sufficient to screen groundwater and soil for 31 PFAS from EPA. It is from a compilation of different sources, but that's what the regional office puts out. And so while going all the way through rulemaking under the Safe Drinking Water Act is limited to 6, we actually have toxicity values for maybe about 10 to a dozen. And then the ability to screen based on human health risk concerns here in the US to up to 31. And that number is just going to continue to grow for sure.
Thank you.
But I'm not sure if I fully answered your question. You did ask about the range of toxicity.
Yes.
And so what is important from that information is while we have toxicity values, meaning potential for human health concern, for sure, the level at which or the potency of that toxicity varies by, if my math is correct, 8 orders of magnitude. So that's 100 million fold difference. So for example, PFDOA, and this is in my testimony, has a screening level of 800 parts per billion. And that's compared to the screening level for, again, for PFOA, which we know is bioaccumulative, has multiple potential human health effects associated with it, right? There's a reason that number is so low. But so to say they're all exceptionally toxic when there's such a wide range. And again, toxicologists put toxicity in relation to exposure. So we have to be exposed there has to be exposure for there to be a risk. So if a PFAS, if we're not exposed to it, there's not going to be a risk, right? If it's not in our water, we're not able to ingest it. If we're not breathing it in, if it's not in our food, and if it doesn't get into our bodies, then there's no real risk. There's no toxicity.
Thank you. I am going to bring up if you give me just one more moment. I have I have some other items I would like to bring up. Okay. Dr. Anderson, did you review New Energy Economy Exhibit KH-1 the CV of Dr. Kristen Hansen?
Yes, I did.
Is Dr. Hansen a toxicologist?
No, she's not.
Did you review Dr. Hansen's direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Did you review Dr. Hansen's rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
Okay. May I share? Oh, I think I can. Yes, thank you. What I have in front of you, Dr. Anderson, is New Energy Economy Exhibit A, which is the direct testimony of Dr. Hansen.
It's not sharing yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Huh. Let me try again. There we go. I'm sorry to scroll through this. I don't mean to make every, oh, that's not it. Excuse me. Here we go. Thank you. Now I have New Energy Economy Exhibit A in front of you. I'm sorry to make everybody motion sick by scrolling through here. I don't know a better way to do it. Okay. I'm on page 10 of Dr. Hansen's direct testimony, lines 19 through 22, that reads, PFAS are a class of 10,000 to 15,000 different compounds, reflecting a diverse set of chemical characteristics. And these characteristics explain why different PFAS are used in different applications. Dr. Hansen, do you agree with this statement?
The highlighted statement? Yes, I do.
In terms of toxicology, does diversity matter? The diversity of the PFAS matter?
If we're talking specifically about the diversity of molecular size, functional groups, reactive groups, and physical chemical characteristics, yes, for sure.
And would that diversity be what we looked at on that slide of all the different chemical structures of the PFAS? Is that what you mean?
Correct. And I just showed a small snippet of the diversity.
Page 6 here. Okay, I'm now on page 6 of Dr. Hansen's direct testimony, starting at line 6. She says, there are 6 well-characterized PFAS compounds. And I'm just going to say the acronyms, not the full names. PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, PFBS, PFNA, and HPFO-DA or Gen X. These well-characterized PFAS span a range of chemistries and are therefore reasonable surrogates for the thousands of unstudied members of the class in considering environmental mobility and toxicity to humans. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Do you agree with Dr. Hansen that there are 6 well-characterized PFAS?
If by well-characterized here, she's meaning on the toxicity front for human health, yes.
Do you agree that these 6 specifically have been well-characterized for toxicity?
These 6 have been through the Safe Drinking Water Act. And as I just said previously, there are actually a few others.
Do analytical methods exist for these 6 PFAS?
Yes, they do.
And is that because they have at least 2 fully fluorinated carbons?
I don't know why these on the analytical list, but these are, they behave similarly and they are found with this, a frequency of occurrence. So they are the attention of the researchers putting together the analytical methods.
Would these 6 compounds be included in the definition of PFAS as NAMOGA proposes?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of surrogacy, do you believe that these 6 compounds are reasonable surrogates for the understudied or unstudied members of the class in considering both environmental mobility and toxicity?
I do not agree with that statement.
Why not?
Because they would only serve as reasonable surrogates if we understood that the understudied or unstudied specific PFAS might degrade into one of them. So if a PFAS has in its structure 8 carbons that are fully fluorinated, it would degrade to PFOA, and we might reasonably assume that there would be similar concerns with that one. But if a PFAS does not have those key carbons in a chain with the right number, because that matters, again, PFBS and Gen X are not bioaccumulative, they're too small, then they wouldn't represent a good surrogate for assumptions about environmental mobility or toxicity.
Would it be a fair characterization of your testimony that just because something is a PFAS, you cannot assume that it is mobile and toxic?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Mulcahy, would you identify a good stopping point? We need a break.
Yes, I apologize. Right now would be fine.
All right, let's come back at 10:40.
got rid of, no, I got rid of, I don't know.
Okay, they're becoming unruly now. But, all right.
No, I'm not gonna know that, but I left it there.
Okay. When we broke, Ms. Mulcahy was leading Dr. Anderson through some rebuttal testimony. Ms. Mulcahy?
Thank you. I'm scrolling to page 7 of Dr. Hansen's direct testimony. I'm looking at lines 9 through 10 here, or excuse me, 9 through 11. Of the well-studied PFAS compounds, all but one, HPFO-DA, bioaccumulate in humans with half-lives ranging from between several weeks, PFBS, to several years, PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, PFNA. Did I read that correctly, Dr. Anderson?
Yes, you did.
Do you agree with this statement from Dr. Hansen?
No, I do not. First, to clarify, if she's just referring to those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it is accurate that their bioaccumulation or their half-lives, are the elimination half-life or how quickly it takes the human body to get rid of about half. That's correct. Several weeks for PFBS to several years. Several weeks is not typically considered bioaccumulative. And in fact, some of the regulatory cutoffs for bioaccumulation don't actually even include PFOA, but I disagree with that. So it's just a little too oversimplified. We also have bioaccumulation information on a whole host of other PFAS. Some are bioaccumulative and some are not.
And you mentioned half-lives. From a toxicology perspective, why do half-lives matter?
So in order for a chemical to cause potential adverse effects, it has to be in our bodies. So the half-life is how long it's in our body before it either degrades, like some of the polyfluorinated compounds or more traditional compounds that we're used to. And why that's important is for other classic chemicals, we eliminate them pretty quickly, either through our urine or through our bowel movements. And so they don't stay in our bodies. They don't have an opportunity to stick around and cause adverse effects. But we are especially concerned about bioaccumulative compounds, PFOA, PFAS, and the long chain fully fluoridated alkyl acids for sure.
And you said when we are concerned about the bioaccumulative compounds, and then you said PFOA and PFAS, I just want to make sure the record's clear. You're saying PFOA
Yes,
and PFOS?
Yes, sorry, I meant to spell them out. Forgot the rule.
That's okay, no problem. Okay, and I'm still here on page 7. I'm now looking at lines 12 through 15, where Dr. Hansen says, according to the CDC's, Agencies for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, the well-studied PFAS compounds are all linked to one or several health effects in humans, including cancer, developmental toxicity, endocrine disruption, cardiovascular disease, immune system toxicity, and liver toxicity. Did I read that correctly, Dr. Anderson?
Yes, you did.
Do you agree with this statement from Dr. Hansen?
No, I do not.
Why not?
There's a few little problems. First, the terminology linked to. I'm going to use ATSDR. That's the more common acronym for the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. They typically, and more common toxicologists and risk assessors will use the phrase associated with. There's no citation to this statement, so I can't be for sure where she's getting this information. So that's one problem. I would have rewritten it to be associated with. The several is that the health effects listed here, while certainly may be a concern for one or more of the PFAS, not all that are listed here even. Does that make sense? So if we're talking about, again, just the 6, for example, only PFOA has been associated with a few very specific types of cancer in humans, and only PFOS has been associated with a potential risk for cancer based on laboratory animal data. For example, PFBS, to my knowledge, hasn't been associated with immune system toxicity. So there's some differences. I do want to be clear, these PFAS do have similar toxicities, but it's not correct to be like they're all associated with the same list. Overlapping, yes. They share very similar chemical structures.
Thank you. And you said that you're going to change the language from linked to associated with. Why is that language important?
I know it sounds like a crazy nuance, but toxicologists and risk assessors are very careful and most often use associated with. That means there's a line of evidence that strongly supports from a statistical association, either in humans, typically with humans. We reserve words like cause for real experimental studies where you're hypothesis testing, you have a control, and those are done in animals or perhaps cells of petri dishes, those kinds of things. Very rarely would we ever use the word cause if we're so associated with a chemical. And because we know that toxicity is associated with exposure and different doses, and there's a lot of nuance there.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on page 7 and I'm going to scroll down to lines 17 through 19. Dr. Hansen testifies, pathways of human exposure to PFAS include gestation via placenta, ingestion, including via breast milk, drinking water and food, inhalation, and dermal absorption. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Dr. Anderson, do you agree with this statement by Dr. Hansen?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because here she dropped the use of the well-studied and just used PFAS, PFAS. So one might assume then that she's referring to the entire class, and that's just simply incorrect. If we were talking about a few very specific PFAS, then this could be true, with the exception of dermal absorption. Dermal absorption is not widely accepted as a potential pathway of exposure for even PFOA or PFOS.
While we're talking about this topic of well-studied PFAS and toxicity and other characteristics of these well-studied PFAS, since we're in this subject matter, then would it be accurate to say that all PFAS, PFAS compounds bioaccumulate?
No, it's not accurate.
Would it be correct to say that all PFAS compounds, as Dr. Hansen points out, have the same toxicity?
No, that's
Objection to that question. That is not what Dr. Hansen says, and she is mischaracterizing Dr. Hansen's testimony.
All right, we're looking at it, Ms. Mulcahy. I don't see that it says they are all equally toxic. I see that all are linked to one or several health effects.
Okay. Dr. Anderson, did you hear the testimony from Dr. Sandow earlier this week?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear when Dr. Sandow testified that some PFAS are inert?
Yes, I did.
Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would.
Do you have any examples of inert PFAS, or could you talk about why some PFAS are inert?
Sure. I don't know exactly what Dr. Sandow was referring to, but my example would be the fluoropolymer, for example, PTFE. It is, as mentioned earlier, so large that it can absorb through a cell membrane. It doesn't have reactive groups on it, meaning there's not side bits that could react with cells or It's not even water soluble. It's a solid. It's almost sort of just sitting there. In fact, it's used in the medical implantation device industry. So we implant things with PTFE in our bodies and have been for decades.
And if it's implanted in our bodies, does that mean that it is not toxic to humans?
It means that as the conditions of being used in our body, we have not found any reaction from it being there. There's no adverse effects that have been noted. So yes, I would say that from the medical literature, its use on those products have been deemed safe and appropriate.
Thank you. There was much talk and testimony this week about produced water and exposure pathways from produced water in terms of PFAS. Do you recall that testimony?
In general, yes, I do.
Okay. So if a substance such as produced water contained PFAS and it was spilled on the ground, would that automatically mean that there was a risk to human health and the environment?
Absolutely not.
Could you explain why not?
In order for there to be risk, there has to be exposure pathway, 1, and 2, exposure at a concentration or dose that would elicit an adverse health effect. So if a receptor were in contact with the spilled material, and if the material contained chemicals at a concentration or dose level that could cause an adverse health effect, then that would mean that there is a potential for risk. But both of those hypotheses would have to be true.
And when you say exposure pathway, what do you mean by that, Dr. Anderson?
The easy one we typically hear and been talked quite a lot here is drinking water. So if any of those chemicals were to reach a drinking water source, but we also consider incidental ingestion of soil, anything that might get into our bodies via ingestion, whether intentional or incidental. And just again, generally speaking, not speaking about PFAS, but in general, also air, right? If there's chemicals in the air.
And you said not speaking about PFAS, but would the same apply to PFAS?
For the ones that might be volatile, yes.
And in terms of, you said dose. So you said there has to be both an exposure pathway and a dose. So could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by dose?
Sure. Toxicologists, sort of the central tenet of one of the challenges of our job is that literally everything is toxic at some dose, some exposure. The easiest and silliest example is pure water. If you drink enough water quick enough, fast enough, it can cause death, your kidneys, right? And so that's the dose. And I know that's a silly example, but it actually has happened. And so by dose, we understand there to be a threshold for chemicals that at or below, you're not really increasing your risk of adverse effect. Our bodies can handle it. It's our liver's job to process and manage chemicals and get them eliminated from our bodies. And so that dose matters because if you're above the dose, you're going to increase your risk of that health effect. If you're below the dose, your body manages it and there's no increased risk. Defining that dose is tricky.
And so would it be a fair characterization of your testimony to say that in order for produced water spilled on the ground to be a concern to human health or the environment, you both have to, 1, have an exposure pathway, and then 2, have an appropriately large dose?
Objection asked and answered.
Ms. Mulcahy?
I'm asking her to just summarize what we've talked about in several incremental steps to clarify it for both the commission and everyone in the room.
Okay, you don't think she's already given a summary?
I do not believe no.
Okay, go ahead.
So would you like me to state the summary?
I just asked you, is that a fair characterization of your testimony? What I said is, in order for there to be a harm to human health and the environment from produced water that may contain PFAS, would it be a fair characterization of your testimony to say that there must both be an exposure pathway and an appropriately large dose?
Yes.
Earlier, you also talked, and maybe this goes to what you just talked about. So if it does, just let me know. But we earlier talked about the various different PFAS and receptors. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. So how do you, as a toxicologist and risk assessor, determine if there is a connection or a pathway between like a spill and a receptor?
Sure. So I don't want to confuse the term receptor because you used it in two different ways in your question. So I just want to be really clear. So if there is a spill, I utilize expertise of environmental scientists such as our engineers and hydrogeologists and experts in fate and transport like Dr. Richardson to help me understand how the chemicals will move through the environment, what media they'll be in, air, soil, water, biota. And then as a toxicologist, I can then assess and have understanding of different receptors' interactions with those media. How much water do we drink a day? How much air do we drink a day? How much food does an ecological receptor eat from various food groups? We have that information. That's how you combine and figure out an exposure pathway, plus the amount or the dose that's going to be ingested. Once a chemical is ingested, that's where the binding to receptors and the bioavailability takes place. So a chemical has to be able to get into our systems and has to be able to elicit its toxicological effects. And that can happen through a whole myriad of ways.
Thank you. I'm going to scroll to page 8 of Dr. Hansen's direct testimony, lines 10 through 12. She states, PFAS compounds are pervasive and persistent in the environment. Many are highly mobile in the environment, many bioaccumulate, many are toxic to humans and to biota at very low levels. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Do you agree with this statement, Dr. Anderson?
The first statement, PFAS compounds are pervasive and persistent in the environment. I disagree with that. One, I believe Dr. Hansen was operating under the Wild Earth Guardian's definition of PFAS. And as per their definition, some PFAS with the one fully fluorinated carbon are not pervasive or persistent in the environment. Two, even under our definition and a broader definition, the polyfluorinateds can break down. They do break down into other PFAS, to be clear. And so I think there's some confusion and I don't quite agree with that sentence. The second sentence, the use of many is a little questionable. We do know that some PFAS are mobile. I don't know how she's defining many, and I don't know how she's defining highly. Even for the PFAS for which we have data, we know that there are differences in how they move in the environment. That's information I get from my fate and transport experts like Dr. Richardson. We know that some bioaccumulate, but we actually know that many don't. And again, I'm not defining many very well either. For example, EPA has done a machine learning exercise of over 4,000 PFAS, and they found that 50% of them do have a half-life that's greater than several months. Again, that doesn't mean they bioaccumulate, but at least have a longer retention time in our body, half of them. But a third of them was less than a week. So that's not bioaccumulative. Now, that was around 4,000 that they tested, and that was in a machine learning algorithm, complicated. So still yet to be determined, but their machine learning algorithm took into consideration the molecular shape, the chemistries, the physical chemical properties, and the internal biological properties that like receptor binding, movement of them through our bodies. And so again, and then the last part of the sentence, toxic to a toxicologist, that needs to be qualified. What route of exposure and at what exposure level are we talking about? Certainly agree that PFOA and PFAS are really of concern at low levels in the environment. Definitely agree with that.
And that's when you say
PFOA, PFOS, I'm sorry.
That's okay, no problem. And I want to ask you specifically about her statement that many are highly mobile, and you said that you disagree with that. Is that correct?
Correct.
From a toxicology perspective, why does mobility matter?
It matters to me because I need to understand exposure pathways. And the terminology we use is a complete exposure pathway. So we understand that certain chemicals that may be spilled over here may travel and have risk to receptors way over here. We understand that. But which ones and how fast and in what media? So that's the mobility piece. So PFAS, like PFOA, PFOS, and the similar compounds in that group are water soluble. They have different mobilities. They travel, even the ones that look the same, travel differently in the water. But other PFAS, like PTFE, is not water soluble, and some PFAS are gases, so they're not even in the water. The gases, like the hydrofluorocarbons, degrade in the environment in a few days in the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stay on page 8, but oh, excuse me, I'm going to scroll to page 9 now of Dr. Hansen's direct testimony. And I apologize, I don't have it highlighted here, but Dr. Hansen suggests the commission adopt the following definition of PFAS: a class of compound including chemicals with at least one aliphatic perfluorocarbon moiety. Do you agree with Dr. Hansen that the commission should adopt this definition of PFAS?
No, I do not. As I said earlier, the definition that I recommended is aligned with the EPA TSCA program and includes the PFAS of most highest concern and of relevance to this rulemaking.
And earlier, you testified that there are no standardized analytical methods in existence today that can test for one perfluorocarbon moiety. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
So let me ask you, Dr. Anderson, if there are no standardized analytical tests that exist today that can test for one perfluorocarbon moiety, how would the division be able to enforce any such prohibition?
They could not.
I'm going to now go to New Energy Economy Exhibit B, which is the rebuttal testimony of Dr. Hansen. Okay, I'm at the bottom of page 1 on to page 2. And this is long, but I'm going to read it as fast as I can. The production and utilization of PFAS compounds, such as fluoropolymers and fluorosurfactants, include a significant percentage of both PFAS impurities and PFAS residuals. Whether or not a PFAS compound is specifically produced for use by the industry, residual PFAS of a different structure may be present in the overall formulation. It is the responsibility of the industry to control the use of both the compounds produced for their purposes and additional PFAS compounds that are part of that final formulation, including residuals and impurities. Additionally, many PFAS, as well as the impurities and residuals present in a PFAS product, may undergo some level of degradation in the environment, resulting in a smaller, persistent perfluorinated compound. Again, the industry needs to control not only the chemicals necessary for their processes, but also the eventual breakdown products of those PFAS into shorter chain, long-lived molecules. These residual impurities and degradation products are covered by the broader definition I have proposed, which is the definition we just mentioned. Dr. Anderson, did I read that correctly?
I believe so, yes.
Do you understand what Dr. Hansen is talking about when she mentions impurities here?
Can you scroll up just a little so I can see the beginning? Impurities for fluoropolymers, I understand, yes.
Is there something you don't understand?
I don't know what she means by impurities for fluorosurfactants.
Why don't you understand that?
I'm just not aware of what those might be. Certainly degradation products and residuals, yes, if that's what residuals mean, as degradation products.
Okay. Do you understand what Dr. Hansen is talking about when she says breakdown products here?
Breakdown products for the fluorosurfactants, yes. Fluoropolymers are not known to break down.
Do you agree with Dr. Hansen's statements here on pages 1 and 2? And I'm happy to scroll up or down if you might need to see something to address that.
There's a lot here to unpack. I think starting with the bottom line up front and the bigger picture of what I think she's getting at. I agree that we need to control for and think about the potential impurities in fluoropolymers and the potential breakdown products of fluorosurfactants or any other PFAS. And I agree that her definition includes that, but so does ours, because those impurities and breakdown products are the fully fluorinated as small as 2 carbon and groups. And so we do account for those. There's some nuances and some confusion that I have in disagreements with individual statements, but I think what she's getting at, I agree with, and we're accounting for that. I do want to say things like significant percentage of impurities in fluoropolymers, that hasn't been proven to be true, and especially today's manufacture of fluoropolymers are made without, many can be made without PFAS used as processing aids at all. So the chance for PFAS impurity in those specific fluoropolymers is absent. But nonetheless, historically, both for fluoropolymers and fluorosurfactants today, I do think that our definition and my recommendation for consideration is yes, I agree with her. Keep those in mind.
Okay. And I heard you talk about our definition. Do you mean NMOGA's definition?
The one that I and Dr. Richardson proposed, yes.
Okay. And let me ask you then, do the analytical methods that the OCD, the Oil Conservation Division, proposes as part of its definition for PFAS include these impurities?
It does, to the extent we're talking about, again, those fully fluorinated alkyl acids and in some cases perhaps sulfonates. So those chains of carbons that are fully fluorinated, those are on the standard analytical methods and fall under everybody's definition.
Okay. And so then in terms of the analytical methods that OCD proposes as part of its definition for PFAS, does it include breakdown products?
As far as we know, the breakdown products being those terminal fully fluorinated PFAS, yes.
And when you say as far as you know, is that because you testified that not all PFAS break down?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Anderson, Dr. Hansen, in both her direct and rebuttal testimony, mentions, quote, additive toxicity of PFAS compounds. Do you recall Dr. Hansen mentioning additive toxicity in her testimonies?
Yes, I do.
Could you please explain what additive toxicity is?
Yes, and I'm taking a deep breath. It's a doozy. So what she's referring to is a special subdiscipline of toxicology called mixtures toxicology. It really is a specialized field because it's very complicated, highly statistically driven, high need to understand molecular biology and chemistry. And so to simplify it as much as I can, and to use more accurate terminology, there is a default assumption to be health protective that certain compounds that have similar toxicological profiles or similar toxicities may be additive. And by additive, I mean dose additive, not concentration additive. I know, everyone's rolling their eyes. What the heck? I'm sorry. I didn't make up these words. What that means is additive relative to its own dose response and potency. That's the hazard index approach. It does not mean 2 of this chemical plus 2 of a second chemical would equal 4. It means the risk or the potency of the dose is additive. So a risk of, let's say, you have just a marginal risk for one chemical and a marginal risk for another. We assume that added together, you now have an increased risk above either one. So that's what I think she was referring to, although she didn't use the right accurate terminology. And again, additive or mixtures assessment for PFAS is a very, very active area of research, including some of the world's experts at EPA studying this. I've published in this area a few years ago. And it is what is underlying EPA's conservative and health protective assumption of the hazard index approach under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Also, in CERCLA, under Superfund sites, we also always do a hazard index approach for PFAS and for all chemicals, actually. So it is a default assumption that we understand to be health protective, especially when chemicals have similar toxicity profiles. That's the key, is you have to at least start there. The assumption is not all chemicals are additive. They're additive if they seem to be both affecting, say, the liver, or if they're both affecting, say, the thyroid, then you might be increasing your risk for adverse effects in that target organ.
Dr. Anderson, I heard you say that this is an area of study. So has there been any scientific analysis and review of additive toxicity for PFAS compounds?
There has been a ton of research of the potential for mixtures effects, dose additivity, relative potency, and also synergism or antagonism for certain PFAS. Namely, the ones we're finding most often associated with AFFF and in the environment. So PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, that similar alphabet soup. There is literature on those, and it is growing by the week. That literature does suggest that there may be a potential for dose additivity for some of the PFAS, but not all. And the literature is not solid clear yet. So as a default and health protective approach, that's why EPA did the hazard index, and that's why we use the hazard index to screen for all 31 PFAS at Superfund sites. It's important. I mean, unfortunately, EPA's own document on the hazard index approach is almost 150 pages, and their science advisory board has an equally voluminous document on this. This is a very complicated area of research. I think the bottom line is, yes, we need to be aware that we may be exposed to multiple PFAS. And for those individual PFAS where there are similar toxicities, it is health protective to assume that there may be some concern about additivity, dose additivity, scaled by their potency. But for example, PFBS isn't considered to be of risk until you exceed 2 parts per billion. So you have no risk to PFBS in drinking water, according to EPA, unless you exceed 2 parts per billion, or 2,000 part per trillion. Did I do my unit conversion correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And so that's important to keep in mind, that it's the potency that's being scaled, because we recognize that even these PFAS that are well studied have different toxicological potencies. They don't act the same. So it's not concentration adding. I don't know if that's helping or making a lot of sense. I know it's confusing. I also will say PFOA and PFOS are not included in EPA's hazard index approach.
Maybe I can help clarify it by asking this question. Dr. Anderson, do all PFAS, whether you're defining it as 10,000, 15,000, millions, do they all have the same toxicity profiles?
Absolutely.
Objection, asked and answered. We know that they don't, she's said that many times.
Okay. Ms. Mulcahy, please move along.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Anderson, did you hear did you hear Mr. Horowitz direct, did you review Mr. Horowitz direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
And did you review his rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
And did you hear him in person testify earlier this week?
Yes, I did.
Okay. In his direct and rebuttal testimonies, Mr. Horowitz discussed requiring broad disclosures about various oil and gas operations to a litany of individuals, including schools, government actors, first responders, and many other entities and individuals. Do you recall this testimony?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree with Mr. Horowitz that these broad disclosures should be made?
No, I do not.
Why not, Dr. Anderson?
Because I feel like, and have experienced in my own professional work, that simply disclosing chemicals to stakeholders and individuals who cannot put that into context is not appropriate. First line of Risk Communication 101, put the risk in context, provide information to the audience that will help them understand and hear the information and make well-informed decisions for themselves. And so because a disclosure of chemicals does not provide any information about potential pathways of exposure, concentrations or levels of exposure, or toxicity, then the recipients of that information can't make informed decisions.
Dr. Anderson, you said in your own work, you have experienced that broad disclosures are not advised. Could you please provide some examples of that?
Sure. There's a few. I think from a personal experience, I have presented to communities that have been devastated by the effects of AFFF release in their communities and contaminated water. And back a decade ago, when we didn't have good information about guidance from federal agencies or public health agencies, it was horrific to present information on even with a complete exposure pathway and not the context about what that meant from a risk. And it's really disturbing and upsetting to all parties, but especially the people, to receive that information and then have the deliverer of the information unable to put it in context. And I vividly, similar to the testimonies we've been hearing all week, people deserve to understand and have the risk put into the appropriate context by people who have the right information and have the training and expertise to interpret that information. Another example, I have the honor of being on what's called the Water and Health Advisory Council, and we support local mayors with information around emerging contaminants in drinking water. And one of my council colleagues studies political science and social science and the policies around political decisions around chemicals in drinking water and public trust. And so specifically his work looks at, and I have experienced this myself because I also have worked with some municipalities, they have to issue, public water systems issue what's called consumer confidence reports or CCRs. And in those, they have to disclose chemicals that have been detected and by bacteria as well, without a lot of context. And his work and others in the published literature has demonstrated that that actually reduces the confidence that people have in our tap water system. And I, have been unfortunately helping guide clients that need to put context and risk in context, because simply listing chemical names again doesn't provide that right information that the public deserves to have.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. In that same vein, has NMOGA proposed a manner by which to disclose all chemicals to the division when and if needed?
Yes, I believe we have.
In your professional opinion, would that protect the public?
Yes, it would. So what the proposal is full disclosure of all chemicals to OCD, right? That allows them, and this is in context with the ban of PFAS, right? That then allows OCD, the trained experts, and with the authority and the ability to then interpret that information and make sure that any potential exposure pathways are mitigated.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't mean to jump around here, but I want to go to what's been marked as Dusty Horowitz's rebuttal testimony, which is Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 94. I'm sorry, if you'll give me just one moment. I thought I had it pulled up, but I guess I don't. Share this. I'm now sharing what has been marked, and you can see it's Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 94, which is the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Horowitz. Mr. Horowitz states, the Interstate Technology Regulatory Council, ITRC, tracks the regulation of PFAS in drinking water across the United States and shows that these regulations reflect the exceptional toxicity of PFAS, for which significant toxicity data exist. Did I read that correctly, Dr. Anderson?
Yes, you did.
Dr. Anderson, are you familiar with this ITRC publication for drinking water standards that Mr. Horowitz mentions here?
Yes, it's a table.
Why are you familiar with this?
I developed it and helped author it.
Okay. Could you discuss this ITRC process here for developing and tracking drinking water regulations as it relates to PFAS?
Sure, especially in the early days when there wasn't so many, it was really important to provide guidance to states on the various different regulations that were coming out for PFAS. It's not just drinking water, actually. It's groundwater, surface water, soil. Depends on the tab you click on. And so there was a small team of us. It's much bigger than one person could do. Monitored and tracked and had feedback and fillers out to all the state agencies and compiled their information in a massive tracking table that just continued to grow and grow. The table includes which state, under which program, for which media, and for which specific PFAS, the level, whether it's draft, final, or promulgated or not, because some of these are guidance. And then also contains a reference link to ensure that people can always go back to the authoritative source. So that was part of what we would call an evergreen part of the ITRC PFAS technical and regulatory guidance document, which actually I referred to earlier from the graph of the slides. That guidance document is posted online. It's been updated once. It's in the process of re-updating it as well. But the table we tried to update every month or so. It hasn't been updated in a while because frankly, it got quite arduous.
Thank you. Can you explain some of the assumptions that EPA uses in setting drinking water standards for PFAS?
Sure. So for the PFAS for which we have MCLs, drinking water standards, in general, the assumptions are that those standards are health protective for even the most sensitive population. There's modifying factors or uncertainty factors, depending on what terminology you want to use, to ensure that it includes and protects the variability of human response. They also assume a certain amount of exposure to drinking water per day for a lifetime. So 2.5 liters. Well, I should clarify. It depends on the receptor that the drinking water value is derived for. So we know, for example, how much drinking water an average lactating woman consumes. And that's important because if one of the critical effects is developmental, we want to make sure that we're considering the increase in water intake for a woman while she's lactating. And we don't use the pregnant woman because it's typical that a lactating woman actually drinks more and for longer. Similarly, if it's a child, we assume body weight and drinking water ingestions. There's also an assumption for the 4 for Gen X, PFBS, HXS, that the majority of our exposure actually does not come from drinking water. And that's calculated, that numerically adjusted in the number.
Thank you. And so Mr. Horowitz says, these studies show these regulations reflect the exceptional toxicity of PFAS for which significant toxicity data exists. Do you know what PFAS analytes have toxicity data for them?
Just toxicity data, gosh, hundreds, really. As I mentioned, bioaccumulation numbers coming out of EPA. There's actually about 24 PFAS that have classic rodent toxicity studies. That's where we're in a lab. Someone is experimentally doing sort of the traditional. Now, whether those are cancer bioassays or chronic, I'd have to go in piece by piece. But we have good information for a good handful. Again, these modifiers of many and large are hard. What does that mean?
And Dr. Anderson, the definition of PFAS that NMOGA proposes, would it be protective of drinking water?
It would include all of the PFAS for which we understand occur in drinking water or have the potential to. Yes. Am I answering that? Okay.
Thank you. Did you hear Dr. Brown testify earlier this week?
I did, yes.
In his testimony, Dr. Brown stated that all PFAS are toxic at very, very low concentrations. Do you recall this testimony?
I do, yes.
Do you agree with that testimony?
I do not.
Why not?
Because he used the word all PFAS. And as we've been discussing, they're very different.
Did you hear Dr. Brown's testimony that scientists do not know how PFAS act in receptor systems?
I don't recall if that's the exact wording that he used, but I recall that sentiment, yes.
Would you agree with that sentiment?
Did he, and it's all
Yes.
correct? Oh, that's the sentence. So no, I don't agree with that statement.
Okay. Could you explain?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the sentence? I'm getting confused.
Sure. I said, did you hear Dr. Brown's testimony that scientists do not know how PFAS act in receptor systems?
Okay.
I'm going to have to object. I do not recall that being Dr. Brown's testimony.
Can you point to where you heard that?
I don't have a line marker, obviously, because we don't have a written transcript, but it was on his afternoon testimony that he said that scientists do not know how PFAS act in receptor systems. And he was talking about his studies in Pennsylvania and saying that's why you have to have full disclosure so that we can see what chemicals are out there, so we can look at how they might be picked up in receptor systems.
I remember something like that, Mr. Davis. Go ahead.
I'd just like to note that I believe he was referring to when he was doing this in Pennsylvania under a situation where there is no full chemical disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Bouquet.
Do you agree with that statement that scientists do not know how PFAS act in receptor systems?
I don't know exactly what you mean by receptor systems, but I would agree that we do not know, even for the PFAS that we've studied, exactly how they act to cause adverse effects. That's how I would say that. And I think that's what he was trying to get at there.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Brown also testified that full disclosures of all chemicals to the public should be required because it allows public health officials to make the best decisions. Do you agree with that?
I don't understand how, no, because I don't understand how information to the public helps public health officials make decisions.
Could you talk about some general best practices in terms of risk communications to the general public?
Sure. So there are two different scenarios I think we have to be mindful of. In the scenario where we don't know if there's a risk, that's the one I'm going to answer. Meaning we don't know if there's a complete exposure pathway. We don't know that there's chemicals in someone's drinking water. That's not the scenario. In that situation, the best approach, well, really for all of them, is have a trusted authority deliver the information. That's standard 101 risk communication. 2, make sure that the information is in context that can be understood and appreciated and heard by the public. 3, have actionable sort of, what are we doing about it kind of statements, you know? And I guess maintain that open line of communication. Those are kind of the hallmarks of good risk communication practices. Consistent communication from trusted authorities with the information correctly put in context around risk and what that means to the public.
Thank you. Now I want to sort of switch gears here. Did you hear Dr. Martin's testimony this week?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear Dr. Martin's testimony about PFAS compounds that have actually been studied?
Yes.
Do you agree with Dr. Martin's testimony that it is only about 10 PFAS compounds that have been studied?
No.
Do you know why some PFAS compounds are studied and others? Well, sorry, let me back up. How many PFAS compounds have been studied, Dr. Anderson?
Well, again, this have been studied is quite ambiguous. The number ranges in the hundreds as far as data collected that might inform potential human health or ecological toxicity. That data could span from computer models that EPA is running, academic research that's being published, again, in the hundreds. If we're talking about derivation of toxicity values, which means that threshold for where exposure is acceptable or not, then yes, that list gets narrowed to about a dozen.
Do you have an understanding of why some PFAS compounds are studied and others are not?
Yeah, as we've heard, and I think it's common knowledge, but as we heard in Dr. Hansen's testimony, PFOA and PFAS started the whole problem and the disclosures from 3M about finding them in the environment and remote places and serum. And so because of the volume of use of fluorosurfactants that are similar to PFOA and PFAS, because of the known concerns, we looked for the worst first, right? I mean, you have a list of CAS numbers, you understand their chemical structure, and you look at the ones that we can say those look similar. We better study them and understand, are they showing up in the same places? Are the exposure pathways the same? And are their toxicity profiles similar? So it's not random. It's not pick a PFAS out of the air and let's study it. It's a deliberate lines of evidence approach to ensure that we're trying to look at the ones that may pose the most concern for human health.
Thank you. That's helpful. Sort of along that line, can you then, Dr. Anderson, could you extrapolate that the PFAS that have been studied and that have been found to be toxic means that all PFAS are toxic?
No, we cannot.
And I'm pretty much done here with your rebuttal. I would just ask, after listening to this week's testimonies and reviewing the written testimony of other witnesses in this matter, is there anything that I didn't ask you to rebut, but that you think would be helpful to rebut, helpful to the commission, helpful to the parties in this proposed rulemaking?
Not that I can think of sitting here. I just think I would like to reiterate that that the definitions proposed by all three parties include PFOA, PFAS, the ones that have drinking water regulations, like that we understand A, with toxicity information, and B, our broader list that may similarly be acting. And so I just assurance that like we're all getting to the similar, like the intentions are all there.
Thank you. I have nothing further. I pass the witness for cross.
All right, thank you. I would turn to Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, would you prefer to leap into your cross or to take a lunch break?
I will defer that to Ms. Nanasi. I believe she's next in order of cross.
Oh, okay. I was going to go around the bend there, right? I end with Namoga. I start with you, end with Namoga. So I was going to go back to the beginning, but you can cross in any order you'd like.
Do you?
I'm happy to go.
All righty, thank you.
But can you just give me an idea about what time you want to stop for lunch?
So commission, any input there? You want to do it now?
I can also, if it pleases the commission, I could just go for like 15 minutes and then stop.
We can, okay, well, noon.
Okay.
Can we do it at noon?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nancy.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, good afternoon, almost.
Yes, almost. Almost there.
You are the vice president, you are a vice president of GSI Environmental, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you been with GSI Environmental?
2019.
How much are you getting paid for your testimony in this case?
$3.50 an hour.
And it's correct that you've been here this entire week, is that right?
I arrived late morning on Tuesday, so I missed, unfortunately, the very beginning public statements.
In your CV, which is NMOGA Exhibit E1, you list a lot of experience working for oil and gas companies. Is that right?
I have some experience working for oil and gas. I also have experience working for a wide range of stakeholders.
You've worked for oil and gas and chemical companies in cases against the state of Alaska, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the city of Arcadia. Is that correct?
Could you read what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania one is? Because that is not oil and gas, I don't believe. I just want to make sure I'm thinking the same one.
If we're going to ask her about the exhibit, would you mind if we just pull it up so we can know what she's referencing?
We can pull it up or you can read it, Ms. Nancy.
Yeah.
Either way.
In your CV, NMOGA Exhibit E1, you list your work on behalf of Dow Chemical. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that the same Dow Chemical that in 2011 agreed to pay $2.5 million civil penalty to EPA for violations of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, known as RCRA, RCRA, at its chemical manufacturing and research complex in Midland, Michigan, for unpermitted outfall discharges?
Objection.
I am not done with my question.
Let her finish her question.
To the Tittabawassee River. In addition, Dow failed to prevent pollution from running into nearby water bodies during rain events.
Okay, what's your objection, Ms. Mulcahy?
I'm going to object. That's outside the scope of both Dr. Anderson's direct and her rebuttal testimonies. I have no issues with Ms. Nancy asking Dr. Anderson about specific things that are listed on NMOGA Exhibit E1, but about other items and other companies not listed there, I'm going to object.
Yeah, Ms. Nancy, I don't know what pertinence Dow's compliance history would have to this proceeding unless there was some direct impeachment of Dr. Anderson through that. Do you have? I mean, it just a general reference to Dow's environmental compliance history doesn't, I don't think helps us out here.
Well, this is an impeachment, I believe, and this is this expert that NMOGA is calling, and I believe that I could ask an initial foundation question, but I believe that Dr. Anderson was the expert for Dow Chemical against EPA when EPA found Dow Chemical to have committed these violations. I think it's relevant, especially when it's about contamination of waterways.
Dr. Anderson was not a Dow chemical expert, and that's not what she's listed on Exhibit E. That's a complete mischaracterization of what's on that exhibit.
All right. So, Ms. Nancy, you can ask her if she was Dow's expert there, as I think you've just indicated you have reason to believe. Is that true, Dr. Anderson?
I was not.
Okay.
What is on E13, it says that you performed expert services on behalf of Shell and Dow Chemical, that you served as an expert on the use and interpretation of regulatory standards and toxicity values for 123- I have to spell this, TRICHLOROPROPANE.
Could you put it up on the screen? But in general, 1,2,3-trichloropropane, the work I did for Dow and Shell was in California.
Okay, so you did perform this expert services for Dow Chemical and Shell?
Specific to a litigation matter in California.
Okay.
And that case should be cited appropriately. Please show me if I have not.
Okay, what did your expert testimony involve?
In that matter, I was opining on the regulatory state for 1,2,3-trichloropropane.
And what was the result of that case?
I actually do not know.
Referring to your testimony on page 5, is it your expert testimony that because insufficient data exists for all 10,000 plus members of the PFAS class, that the logical conclusion from these data gaps is that the compounds should be considered safe?
Can you pull up what you're referring to? I don't believe I used the word safe, no.
No, I'm just asking you. Is it your expert testimony that because insufficient data exists for all 10,000 plus members of the PFAS class, that the logical conclusion from these data gaps is that those compounds should be considered safe?
No.
Objection. That's a mischaracterization. Mr. Nancy said in your written testimony, you talk about insufficient data on these PFAS, which Dr. Anderson does talk about insufficient data. That is not what she concluded in her written testimony.
Okay, and she has already given her answer, which was no, that was not her testimony. Go ahead, Mr. Nancy.
For the record, I would respectfully request that, first of all, my name is Nanasi, and second of all, that Ms. Mulcahy state her objection and not try and influence the witness's testimony. Do you agree from a risk management standpoint, it makes sense that we not continue to add more of the PFAS compounds into the environment on the basis of ignorance about the toxicity, mobility, or reactivity of a specific compound?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you agree from a risk management standpoint, it makes sense that we not continue to add more of these PFAS compounds into the environment on the basis of ignorance about the toxicity, mobility, or reactivity of a specific compound?
Objection. That's a compound question.
Would you break that down, please?
Do you agree from a risk management standpoint that it makes sense that we not continue to add more PFAS compounds into the environment?
Which PFAS compounds are you referring to?
Any.
So can you repeat your question? Make sure I understand.
Do you agree from a risk management standpoint, it makes sense that we not continue to add more PFAS compounds into the environment?
I think I have to disagree if I'm understanding your statement correctly, which I'm not sure that I am, but.
You would agree that reliance on cancer is not the only worthy toxicity endpoint, correct?
If you're asking me if there are other adverse effect health endpoints that are important than cancer, yes, I agree with that.
You would agree that studies have shown that various PFAS compounds suppress immune response, especially in children, for instance.
Those have only been shown for some of the PFAS compounds.
You would agree that studies have shown that some of the PFAS compounds have been demonstrated to result in preeclampsia in pregnant people, as well as to result in low birth weight babies, correct?
Some of the PFAS and some of the studies, yes.
I'm sorry, can we pause for a second? We just have a lot of activity, and I think we're looking for some documents up here.
Commissioner was looking for the CV, and this big booklet went through D, but not E. Okay.
In there, but these versions are all the same. There's no difference.
These are key. Yeah, we do have one like that last year. You could borrow presentation.
And I have not made any notes in that. It's completely clean.
Okay. All right, I think we're settled, yes, or no? You would like an E as well? Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Is it true that chronic toxicity by its nature takes many years to characterize?
Characterized by what? I don't understand the question.
Um, Let me ask this. Do you agree that the phrase "there is no evidence," quote unquote, is not the same as saying we have studied this extensively and here's the data demonstrating that there is no risk?
Yes, I agree with that.
Do you know that the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry mission is to protect communities from harmful health effects related to exposure to natural and man-made hazardous substances? We do this by responding to environmental health emergencies, investigating emerging environmental health threats, conducting research on health impacts of hazardous waste sites, and building capabilities and providing actionable guidance to state and local health partners.
Objection. Compound question. I have no issue with her asking the question if she breaks it down.
Yeah, please break it down.
This is the mission statement of CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And if you could just let me know if you think that this is an accurate statement of their mission statement. ATSDR protects communities from harmful health effects related to exposure to natural and man-made hazardous substances.
I'm not familiar with ATSDR's mission statement.
But you are aware that the CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry addresses exposure to hazardous substances, correct?
Correct.
And you're also aware that ATSDR responds to environmental health emergencies. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And that they also investigate emerging environmental health threats, correct?
Correct.
They also conduct research on health impacts of hazardous waste sites.
Objection. I don't believe that Dr. Anderson testified at all about hazardous waste sites.
Let me just offer a general bit of guidance, Dr. Anderson. If something is outside of your expertise, please say so. And I understand your objection also goes to scope. Is that correct? Right?
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer.
Madam Hearing Officer, if I could respond, I believe that there was a fair number of questions actually about Dr. Hansen's site, which was on the screen and was asked about CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry specifically.
Okay. Let's just go a little ways here and see if it can be tied back to her testimony. Go ahead.
Are you aware that the CDC Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry also conducts research on health impacts of hazardous waste sites?
I'm not familiar with that work, no.
Okay. You were asked by your counsel about what PFAS or PFAS compounds the oil and gas industry has used in New Mexico. Do you recall that?
Objection, I didn't ask that question.
I'm asking you that question. Do you have any idea about the PFAS or PFAS compounds the oil and gas industry has used in New Mexico?
No, I do not.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Let's take an hour for lunch. We'll return at 1 and to questions by Mr. Davis.